Do you catch yourself reacting in ways that push others away, but then you feel guilty and confused? Or were you ever called a narcissist and wondered, what does that really mean? If any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone, and that's exactly why I created Office Hours with Dr. Anthony Mazzella. That's me. Office Hours is a low-cost, small group space where you could bring your questions about these thoughts and experiences. Together, we'll work through confusion and help you build healthier relational patterns. Basically, this is a space designed for anyone looking for clarity, insight, and support. If that sounds like you, just click the link in the show notes below to join us for our next meeting. Okay, I hope to see you there. Have you ever noticed yourself dating the same kind of partner over and over again, even though you swore you'd never go back to that type of relationship? Or maybe you keep ending up in friendships where you feel used, or in jobs where you're not appreciated. In my work with people caught in these patterns, I often see it extend into even more destructive behaviors. Maybe you keep slipping back into drugs or drinking, seeking out prostitutes, clashing with supervisors, repeating affairs and betrayals, lying, or covering things up. Even after trying therapy, sometimes more than once, you still find yourself pulled back into the same or similar destructive cycles you thought you left behind. Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In this episode, we're going to explore the hidden forces that make receiving help, goodness, or something pleasant and positive feel so threatening. Why do you, or someone you might know, keep repeating painful patterns, even when it makes you miserable? In psychodynamic theory, this is what we call the, and I quote, repetition compulsion. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The repetition compulsion, or we could say the compulsion to repeat, is a complicated concept with a long history in psychoanalysis. Freud first introduced it when he noticed some of his patients reenacting painful experiences instead of simply remembering and reflecting on them. Since then, it's been debated, expanded, and reinterpreted for more than a century. Bion, that's another psychoanalyst, in a famous paper he wrote, Learning from Experience, questioned why some people seem unable to learn from their past mistakes and missteps. Over time, the idea has moved beyond Freud's original observations and Bion's questions. Today, however, most people use this concept in a much simpler way, as a description of how we unconsciously repeat old relational patterns, even when those patterns bring pain. It's not that this definition is inaccurate. In psychodynamic therapy, the repetition compulsion is often defined as our unconscious drive to repeat early painful experiences, usually, and I quote, with the hope that this time it will turn out differently. So in other words, there's a fantasy that one can master these old painful situations. That's the most common way it's understood today. And I'm saying it's a really helpful starting point to think about it this way. But if we stop there, we miss something essential. Because without a deeper understanding of, I'm quoting, like why we repeat, we're left with only one explanation of this highly complicated and complex dynamic. And if you have only a surface level explanation, guess what might happen? You're more vulnerable to falling into the same destructive patterns again and again. So, the goal of this episode is to give you a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of why you might be repeating destructive patterns, particularly when it comes to narcissism. We'll look at where this compulsion comes from, why change feels so threatening, and what it takes to begin to break free. So, why does having a more comprehensive and deeper understanding of the repetition compulsion matter? Let me respond to that question with an example, a prototypical example that I often encounter in my psychodynamic work with these patients. And I think examples are always really helpful. It's sort of where the rubber meets the road. Someone who grew up with a narcissistically preoccupied or critical parent may later find themselves drawn to partners who are emotionally unattuned or judgmental. On the surface, it makes no sense. Why seek out what originally hurt you? One reasonable explanation is that unconsciously, again, I come back to that word, there's hope. The inner logic may look something like this. If I can finally make this person love and accept me, I will feel seen, good, alive, and maybe I'll heal the wound from my past. That's the inner logic. In other words, this comes from unresolved trauma and unmet needs in childhood. The child couldn't change the parent or escape the situation, so as an adult, the psyche tries again and again, replaying the scenario in different forms, hoping and waiting for a different, more fulfilling outcome. Let's go a little deeper now, because the repetition compulsion is not just about getting stuck in these old patterns of insecure love and attachments. At its core, it raises a more unsettling question. Why is it that when you finally get something good, a healthy relationship, a promotion at work, you stop drinking, or you give up the prostitutes like I mentioned earlier, you suddenly sabotage it by slipping into equally destructive behaviors such as deception, lying, or even stealing? Why is it that some people, no matter how much pain an experience brings, seem unable to learn from it? Okay, so we're diving a little deeper now. Let's ask ourselves, what unconscious bargain is being made when you destroy what you've just won? Which unbearable feeling, envy, shame, unworthiness, fear of intimacy, are you avoiding by recreating the familiar pain? In my work, I've been struck by how certain patients seem committed to repeating outcomes that led only to unhappiness and suffering. A famous psychoanalyst, and you may have heard me quote him before, John Steiner, describes this as a form of, and I quote, resistance to change. For Steiner, the repetition compulsion can be understood as an unyielding resistance, a kind of psychic refusal. This refusal isn't only about fear or habit. It arises from something deeper. And I quote, a hatred of intolerance of anything new, unquote. This is from Steiner. And especially of anything creative or life-giving that could lead to growth. Steiner and other analysts since him link this intolerance to the operation of envy. In other words, when someone encountered something new that might actually help, a creative idea, a nourishing relationship, even a moment of genuine insight from a loved one, envy can twist it into something unbearable. It's not just that you can't take it in, you must attack, devalue, and destroy it. For example, when someone is trying to help you think through a difficult problem, you may find you can't hear them at all. You might dismiss what they're offering, or even interrupt before they finish, blocking their input entirely. Can you imagine this? What looks like a stubborn refusal to grow may actually be a deep struggle with what it means to receive goodness. When we think more deeply about why we repeat destructive patterns, it's important to notice that change often requires letting in something new, something enriching, maybe even life-changing. But for some people, the very experience of receiving goodness can feel unbearable. And that raises yet another question. Why would goodness feel dangerous? Why does receiving or even just thinking about a loved one's opinion, a hug, nurturance, or something as simple as enjoying your favorite dessert that your partner made for you, why would that feel so threatening? Sometimes it's because accepting goodness means acknowledging a need. It means admitting you can be dependent, vulnerable, but if there's a need, you're also incomplete. And for someone who has felt shamed, neglected, or humiliated in no states, again, no states of need or vulnerability, the experience of being helped or nourished doesn't feel safe. It feels threatening. If we step back and look at the earliest origins of receiving goodness, let's consider how our first experiences of care and nourishment can create the foundation for growth, or, when marked by humiliation and shame, can make goodness itself, right? Goodness in itself can then begin to feel like a danger. A child's experience of being fed and cared for can create an inner sense of goodness, a prototype, we could say, for what? Patience, generosity, and creativity. If this, and I'm quoting, goodness can be internalized, which just means taken into yourself and carried around with you later in life, if it can be internalized, it becomes a foundation for healthy development, healthy relationships, and most importantly, the ability, the capacity to accept good things in life. But what happens when being cared for, instead of feeling safe, you're suddenly made to feel exposed, or too dependent, or you're made to feel too needy, or you're made to feel weak?
Let's take a quick break.
Are you tired of feeling like you're walking on eggshells all the time? Do you feel drained, confused, or like nothing you do is ever good enough? Are you stuck in a cycle of elation, then criticism and confusion? If any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. And that's exactly why I created Office Hours with Dr. Anthony Mazzella. That's me. Office Hours is a low-cost, small group space where you could bring your questions about narcissistic traits and dynamics and the places where you feel stuck. You'll be met with honest, grounded feedback. I'll hold the group with structure, but there's also space for a real conversation. This is a space designed for anyone looking for clarity, insight, and support. If that sounds like you, just click the link in the show notes to join us. Okay, I hope to see you there. Early in life, there's always a difference in power and control between children and adults. You could see that, right? When adults have all the power and children have very little. When these power differences are not handled well, for example, by a narcissistically vulnerable parent who cannot relinquish control, the child's attempts at asserting will, autonomy, or independence are met with disapproval. Instead of being supported, the child is made to feel weak, helpless, or inferior. When those feelings become extreme or happen too often, they carry with them a heavy burden of shame and humiliation. Again, examples are always very helpful. So here's an example. I have heard a child might be told, and I'm quoting because I really hear this stuff in my practice, kids are meant to be seen, not heard, or you need to shut up when adults are talking. Now, what do they actually hear? How does a child process something like that? They may process it like, you're too much to handle, or you can't control yourself. And by the way, this isn't just how they process it. They've actually heard these things. Yes, this is stuff that gets reported to me, that these are things that parents actually say to them. You can't control yourself. I should have never had you. I wish you weren't born. You're so needy and greedy. So these messages communicate that their natural being, their natural desires and feelings are dangerous or wrong or unacceptable. Now, here's the really important piece. What often follows is a turn toward what we call narcissistic omnipotent solutions. And by the way, this is the whole grandiose sense of self, the structure that holds the narcissist together. Instead of facing the vulnerability, the psyche creates a defensive structure. It's known as a narcissistic organization. In fantasy, this can look like a kind of perfect superiority. And I'm quoting again, here's the inner logic. I don't need you. I don't need anyone. I'm above all that. So therefore, I don't have to listen to you. Or I can talk right over you. So again, take, for example, a patient who once told me that whenever his partner showed him genuine care, he felt, and I'm quoting, an immediate urge to dismiss it. And you could picture this. So someone is offering something to you, right? And instead of letting yourself feel grateful, like with this prototypical example that I'm giving you here of the patient, he would crack a joke, minimize what was being given to him, pick a fight, or get angry and storm off to another room. Why? Why those reactions? Because to accept her care, in this example I'm given, meant admitting that he needed something. He needed the care. And that required letting go, again, that narcissistic structure that I just mentioned. It would mean letting go of his sense of narcissistic superiority. For him, that dependence felt humiliating, as if accepting goodness exposed him as weak. So instead of taking in what could have nourished him, in other words, filled him up with something good, he pushed it away and he destroyed it with his aggression. Have you ever had the strange experience of feeling worse right after someone is trying to be kind, or right when they're trying to be kind to you? Why? Instead of gratitude, do you feel annoyed and angry? That's the question we need to tackle. Okay, so we're thinking about, why does rejecting care, sabotaging something good, often come with an aggressive edge to it, as if the goodness itself has to be attacked or destroyed? Again, another example. Take, for instance, a prototypical patient that I just mentioned a moment ago, right? Let's continue with that. Whenever his partner showed genuine interest in helping him solve a problem, he felt an immediate urge to dismiss it, right? It wasn't just about admitting that he needed help. It went deeper than that. In that instance of dismissing what his wife was offering, he was also dismissing his partner, the person offering the care. There's something destructive in that response. And I'm sorry if you think I'm being hyperbolic here, but if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, trying to give somebody who's asking for something, some advice or an opinion, you know what this feels like. It is indeed quite destructive. So there is something destructive in that response. The very act of rejecting goodness can harm both the self, that's the self-sabotage, and the other, reinforcing patterns of relational tension and emotional distance and rupture. This is where the concept of envy comes in. I introduced it a moment ago, but this is envy. In psychodynamic terms, envy isn't just wanting what someone else has. It's the discomfort or even resentment triggered by another person's vitality, success, or ability to give without hesitation, something that you cannot do. When someone experiences this kind of envy, receiving care can feel threatening. The good offered by another exposes gaps, vulnerabilities, and perceived deficiencies in the self. This can provoke an almost automatic push to reject or devalue the other person, even someone we love. So, in the simple example I gave earlier about the wife, I mentioned this, your wife makes you your favorite dessert. You may find yourself commenting on how it's overcooked or it's dry. In this way, envy helps explain why the very things that could nourish a relationship, love, care, attention, appreciating the effort she made to cook your favorite dessert, can also feel unbearable, triggering that destructive urge to dismiss it, devalue it, The dessert is dry. That's a devaluation. And then distance yourself from it. Here's what I mean. The moment you experience someone or something as good, giving, or even rich, and I quote the word rich, in some way, you become acutely aware of your own deficiencies, and that becomes the focus. And by the way, when I use the word again, I quote rich, I'm recalling an earlier example from a previous episode on narcissistic rage. A patient became immediately enraged when he saw a man in a nice dress suit, imagining that this man was wealthy and rich and had everything he didn't. That reaction captures how intensely and quickly envy can take over. Have you ever noticed how quickly a small act of kindness or attention can feel threatening instead of comforting? In my experience, this is one of the most important things you can recognize when caught in destructive repetitions. Healing doesn't come from simply looking for more love or reassurance. It comes from acknowledging how painful it can feel to be less than in the presence of someone who seems, in your eyes, to have not just what you need, but that you want and that you feel, you really believe you don't have. For you to feel truly contained and understood, I found it helpful to recognize both sides, the humiliation that comes from needing good things, which you do need, by the way, because most likely there were some deprivations. Remember the child-parent relationship I described earlier that sets the stage for this. So there were real deprivations earlier on. There are needs. So the humiliation that comes from needing good things and the envy that can flare up when imagining someone else possessing them. So both sides of these things have to be recognized. That's what I'm trying to convey. Naming this struggle without judgment, and you could do this too, without judgment of a need, helps create the possibility of a different kind of relationship, both with your partner and yourself, by the way, one where goodness can eventually be received rather than what? Rather than attacked, dismissed, and devalued. So what does that actually look like? You may now be asking. What does it actually look like when you start to recognize that you self-sabotage and that you can't tolerate feeling satisfied or enriched? A patient once told me that when he turned to his wife for guidance, he suddenly felt annoyed and then got angry at her, saying, "You don't really get it." What was striking was that moments earlier, it was clear that she was truly listening to him and thinking about his work-related problem. She seemed to have actually understood something important about his struggle at work, and for a brief second, he appeared relieved. But that glimpse of being helped, of feeling understood, quickly morphed into humiliation. The humiliation was not consciously recognized or expressed. That's really critical to understand. So these people, or you, do not appear to feel humiliated or ashamed on the surface. Why? Why does that happen, or how does that happen? Because it immediately turned into anger and accusations. It immediately turns into rage. For him, admitting that he had received something good from her would require acknowledging his own need, and that felt unbearable. So instead, he attacked the moment of goodness. He clung to the idea that she didn't understand him, highlighting all, and I quote, all the bad aspects of the relationship while keeping the positive parts hidden, even from himself. Again, that may sound familiar to you. Welcome to the world of splitting, something I've discussed much more in prior episodes. So this is one way humiliation operates in repetitive destructive patterns. You may long for and turn to someone for goodness, for assistance, but when it appears, the experience of lack is too painful. Envy and shame rush in, and the goodness is either denied, devalued, or concealed. If this is resonating with you, the next question becomes, how do I allow myself to receive goodness without immediately attacking or devaluing it? How do I notice the envy, shame, or discomfort that arises without letting it dictate my reactions? What's the path forward for someone who's stuck repeating certain destructive patterns? From a psychodynamic perspective, the key isn't simply to give or to get more reassurance. It's about recognizing and working with the underlying dynamics, the envy, the shame, the fear of dependence, and the humiliation that arises when you encounter goodness. In my work with patients, I may gently comment on or invite them to reflect on what I notice, the protective armor, what is known as the psychic retreat. They use it to shield themselves from feeling too much. It's as if they are saying, and again, this is the inner logic, if I let something in, it might be too dangerous. So that's the kind of stuff that I want to help them reflect and start to think about. As we explore your armor together, we begin to see what's underneath. A terror that your feelings of love, care, or need will be mocked or ridiculed. These are the things that I begin to hear as we pull away the layers of the armor. Allowing yourself to need feels unbearable. Here lies the humiliation, the very act of opening up goodness, right? Opening yourself up to receiving goodness, giving or receiving care, triggers all the things that I've been mentioning, the shame, the fear, and the anticipation of being humiliated. Over time, you might come to put this into words yourself. Like one person I work with who simply said, and I quote, "It's all about humiliation," unquote. That recognition captures one of the hidden forces driving these destructive patterns, and gives us a good starting point for real change, for helping you gradually tolerate the goodness you long for without feeling crushed by envy or shame. Understanding this pattern, the interplay of all of these different dynamics that I'm detailing, is key for anyone trying to break free from destructive cycles. Whether in therapy or in relationships outside of the consulting room, recognizing why you are drawn to repeat painful experiences is the first step toward creating something new. And that brings us back to the goal of this episode. I hope today I've given you a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of why you, or someone you may know, might be repeating destructive patterns, and what it takes to begin recognizing and breaking free from them. There's still so much more to say about this, but we have to stop here for now. If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.